I work in I preside over the Christchurch Youth Drug Court, and we run under the radar really. We don't get anything like the publicity that the Auckland two adult courts have, which have recently started, but I'm quite happy about that, and I'm very privileged to be here to join in this discussion. The Christchurch Drug Court is a totally judge-driven initiative. It was started in 2002 by a wonderful man, Judge John Walker, who thought there was a need for this. There was no interest at all, but he came to Christchurch from Wellington and persuaded the youth justice community in Christchurch that this was an idea worth trying. The basic thesis is that you should treat a drug-addicted young person rather than just punish them if you want them to stop offending. I took over from Judge Walker in 2004, and it is without doubt the hardest day's work, apart from working this, the hardest, no? Without doubt, it's the hardest day's work that I ever do as a judge, but it's also the most rewarding. The drug court deals with young people who have been diagnosed with a dependency on of cannabis, alcohol, increasingly, unfortunately, synthetic cannabis or opiates. But I'll talk about the work we do with cannabis-dependent young people, and I'll give you a brief overview of the court. There was no law change when the drug court was started. We still work under the Children, Young Persons and Their Families Act. The young person has to be appearing in drug court. They've got to be a serious offender in terms of either what they've done, so burglary, aggravated robbery, those sorts of things, or the volume of charges. So it can be one serious charge or lots of not quite so serious. We deal with the top-end kids. They've got to have a diagnosed alcohol and or drug dependency, and importantly there's got to be a link between the dependency and the offending, and the young person's got to be prepared to undergo treatment. I have to say at this point that I deal with almost no young people who are facing charges under the Misuse of Drugs Act. In my entire time in the youth court, and I've been a judge now for 14 years, I have never dealt with a young person who has appeared in youth court only facing a charge of possession of cannabis. Very, very, very rarely will I deal with a young person in court on several charges, and one of those will be a possession of cannabis charge. None of the young people currently in drug court, and I've got 14 at the moment, none of them are appearing on a charge under the Misuse of Drugs Act. I think there's reasons for that. One of the reasons is really obvious. These kids don't have much money. They buy their weed on an hour-to-hour, day-to-day basis, and they use it immediately. They don't have settled places to live. They're not able to cultivate anything. But certainly the young people, the drug court, some people think we're dealing with people charged with drug offences. Almost never. So the typical entry path for a young person is they appear in youth court. They have to admit the charge because we're a post-plea court. We are very fortunate in Christchurch. We have alcohol and drug clinician, two of them at court every youth court day. One is in court and one is out of court. If anyone involved with that young person thinks they may have a drug dependency, they'll be screened by the clinician before they come into court. Once in court, their youth advocate will indicate that there's a likely dependency, and the presiding judge will direct what's called a 333 assessment. We are really fortunate in Christchurch. The sort of people who do these assessments for drug court are Professor Doug Selman or Dr. Fraser Todd or people of their ilk. And at the same time that the young person admits the charge, a family group conference is directed. The young person will appear in court usually in about a month's time. In that intervening month, they will have had the assessment. It will often take 10 days. If the assessment confirms the dependence, then at the family group conference that will be convened just after the report's available, the report will be discussed by everyone there. And the people at the conference will be the young person, their whānau, the victims, the police, social workers, a representative from drug court, and possibly a clinician who may be going to work with this young person. If the family group conference decide that drug court would be an option, then the young person appears in court on their next due day, and on that day the judge remands them to drug court. Drug court sits every second Thursday. So the traditional path, a young person will appear in youth court and they may be then in drug court in 3, 4, 5 or 6 weeks later. Coming into drug court is voluntary. The Family Group Conference will have recommended it. They come and meet me in drug court. Prior to drug court, I've read their report and I've discussed their plan and their report with the drug court team. Young person comes into court, we talk about what's recommended. If they are comfortable with it, and if the drug court team, and ultimately me, because I have to be the decision maker, if I agree, then he or she's accepted into drug court. Drug court sits in the usual youth court. It's the same place, but there's one really important difference, and that is the young person gets to sit down. They don't stand in the dock. They get to sit down. They get to sit really close to me. So the young person would be about where that second chair is. A whole lot of reasons for that. One, I see these young kids every 2 weeks, sometimes for a year or more. I have to develop a relationship with them because we're talking about important stuff. I want to see the colour of their eyes, see how they're looking. So that's the main difference. They also have appointments and they spend much longer each time they're in drug court than they would spend in the ordinary youth court. When they come into drug court, I introduce them to the drug court team, and the two main features of the drug court as opposed to the ordinary youth court are firstly consistency of all of those team members, and secondly the immediacy of treatment. So we sit every second Thursday. If any of you read the editorials in the Herald, you'll be aware that us judges get really good holidays. That's upsetting a few people. So we do get lots of holidays. Mostly during the year, I take my holidays in 13-day bunches because drug court's really important, and every time I'm thinking of taking a longer break, there'll be some young kid that's not doing so well, and it's just, we all feel the same. It's really important that we're all there. So that's a really unusual feature of a court. So it's the same police prosecutors, same drug court social workers, same clinicians, even the same court taker. So the young person and their family who we welcome to come to court get to know all of us. What's really, really valuable for me is that I am only a judge. I know a little bit about a really small part of life, really. And so when I'm reading reports written by psychologists, psychiatrists, drug clinicians, sometimes I don't understand what they mean, or more dangerously, I think I know what they mean. So the beauty for me, or the main beauty for me of drug court, is that I have a meeting before each drug court with the experts. And so if I've got a report that I don't understand, I can talk about it and they can break it down into words of no greater than 2 syllables, and so I get it. Or more importantly, I've read the report and I've formed a view, and then I can say this is my view, and the drug court team can challenge me about my view in a way they would never do in open court. And any of you who work in open court or have seen judges in court will see that not many people challenge a judge when they're sitting in court in their black gown. In our drug court meetings, I can get challenged. I can look like an idiot, and that's no biggie, whereas no judge really likes to look like an idiot in a public court. So it's incredibly useful for me to be able to have full and frank discussions about what I'm going to do. That for me is probably the most important aspect of the court and the biggest difference. The drug court team meet every other week as well, but without me. The drug court social worker may see the young people, may see some of them every day if that's what is needed. The authority of the court's important. It's really important in accessing the treatment that we need. And although we sit collaboratively in our meetings, the buck still stops with me, and I still have to be the judge when we get into court. The aim of the court is to identify early these young offenders whose drug dependency in this case is contributing to their offending. And the aims I've put up there, I'm really aware that one of the aims is to reduce the delay in getting young people into treatment. And that's sort of a double-edged sword, particularly for those of you involved in trying to get kids into treatment who aren't in court. And I'm really aware that sometimes the court can take priority, and the treatment places, particularly in residence, are so limited. Our drug court can be seen to be having somewhat of an advantage. Because we are a court, ultimate aim really has to be to reduce crime-associated, drug-associated offending. The young person can be in court for as long as it takes. They can be discharged from court when they've completed everything. And the biggest carrot for a young person to come into court is that they will be discharged without any conviction. So they keep their clean record, they get out without a conviction. That's the biggest carrot that we can offer. If a drug court doesn't work for them, and the dropout rate is pretty low, but for some kids the time's just not right, and if it doesn't work for them, there's no penalty for their lack of success. They've just spent some time, really, and they just are transferred back to ordinary youth court and they go on as normal. When a young person comes into drug court, they come in with a treatment plan. They will have had their assessment done that I've talked about, and as well as the assessment, the very last page of the assessment is a proposed treatment plan. For young people with cannabis dependencies, their treatment plan will involve many of these. All of them will have as part of their treatment plan the urine screens, regular but random. It's really interesting because when kids are doing well, when their levels are coming down, they want to be screened. They come into court and say, am I going to get a test today, miss? And they're really disappointed if they're not. They want to know when their next one will be. And when they start getting clear screens, they are delighted. Many of them want copies of their clear screens. They want the police prosecutor to tell the youth aid officer that they're clear. For some of them, it's the biggest success that they've ever had. One of the things that fascinated me when I first went to drug court was seeing the impact of this regular screening on these young people. It also helps with honesty, because that's one of the first things I talk to them about, that they have to be really honest with me and that I will be really honest with them. And I can't remember the last time a young person gave a screen where the results surprised any of us. They will come in and say, I'll say, we'll have a screen today, and they'll go, oh, I did this last night or did this last week or whatever. So it really assists with that whole honesty thing. We are really lucky in Christchurch that we have Odyssey House, which offers a residential program for young people. The young people go to the day program, some of them, or to residence. Often part of the treatment plan also too may involve them writing a project or an essay. If they're not good, their literacy skills aren't great, they'll do sort of a project or a drawing about the impact of cannabis. And our youth court is surrounded with artworks on the walls of kids who have done things like that. Māori young people will learn their pepeha at the Odyssey House school. If they're at Odyssey House, they have marae visits. Family are also involved in this, and for young people whose families are in Christchurch, then, and if they're at Odyssey, then the Odyssey outreach workers will be working with their family, or the drug court social worker will be making plans for the family. When the young people come into court, they come in also with the other part of their family group conference plan, because they're not just cannabis dependent, they also have committed crime. So there'll be part of the family group conference plan is related to their offending and to their victims. So they may have to do any of those things. Often, of course, at the time of the young person's arrest, they're not in a fit state really to do anything. We had a graphic example of that just in the last drug court last Thursday. We have a young woman who had a raging cannabis dependency, also drank a lot and had been using synthetic cannabis as well. She committed 3 really serious assaults. They probably should have been aggravated robberies, but she was fortunate just to be charged with assaults, and she terrorised 3 other young girls. Her family group conference was held, and by all reports it was an absolute debacle. The young offender was arrogant, rude, just appalling, her apologies were dreadful, but probably the worst thing was that the 3 victims were there with their families. I'm not sure where the venue for the FGC was, but as they left, some of the offenders' friends appeared out of the car park and verbally abused the victims and their families. It was shocking. This young woman has done incredibly well. She has been drug-free now for maybe 6 or 7 weeks, And the family group conference coordinator discussed that there should be another family group conference. She was really anxious about that, but they had one maybe 2 weeks ago. Only 2 of the victims would attend, both with their parents, and interesting, one of them brought her 2 big brothers as well. But they went to this conference, and the offender, the young girl who's in drug court, ended up, she prepared what she was going to say with the help of the drug court social worker and her clinician. She broke into tears. Both victims cried, one of their mothers cried. It was evidently just the most amazing things happened, and the young offender feels a whole lot better, feels incredibly proud that she was able to make amends. She apologised for her friends and what they did, and the report was that the victims and their families felt a whole lot better. So, valuable lesson that sometimes these young kids have to have another bite at the cherry with some things once their brains are cleared. Our court hasn't been well evaluated. Unlike the Auckland adult courts that have just started, we didn't start with a hiss and a roar and a whole lot of government funding. We just started, really. So we're not well evaluated. There was an evaluation done just after the drug court's first year, and this is some of the research from that. There were just 30 young people they evaluated in that first year, and you can see 14 of them had a moderate cannabis dependence. At the time of discharge, 10 of them were in full remission. The situation now is that last week I had 14 young people. That's a pretty representative sample of how things are. And Kylie, you'll notice that we had 7 Māori there, and certainly the Māori youth population in Christchurch wouldn't warrant 50% of the kids in drug court being Māori. Sometimes we have more females than males. Often the females are committing way more serious offences than the boys are. I've noted that one of the kids in drug court lives with both birth parents and one attends school. That's one and the same. So there's one young boy who attends school and he lives with both his birth parents. 10 out of the 14 have had declarations made in the family court that they are in need of care and protection. So these kids, as has already been discussed, have many issues. And sometimes, and it's often said by some of the care and protection social workers, that the best thing that's ever happened to these kids is that they have offended and come into drug court, because they can actually access what they need. But as you all know, addiction covers all spheres of society, and every now and then we will have a young person from a very expensive private school who will appear in court. Also at the moment, one of the females is pregnant. One of our measures of success in drug court is the birth of drug-free babies. Terrible thing to be saying, isn't it, when these kids are 14, 15 and 16. You'll see we have got a couple of 17-year-olds. That's because they offended before they're 16 and we can keep them until 18. We've also got a young boy who's about to become a father. Out of the 14, 3 of them are diagnosed with a severe cannabis dependence, 7 cannabis dependents, 1 cannabis abuse, and 3 both alcohol and synthetic cannabis. I thought it might be interesting just to give you some case studies, because I really want so that you understand the type of young people that we deal with, and also the damage that these young people are not only doing to themselves but to the community. This first, and I've picked 3, and they're all boys. This first young man, the most startling feature is that of his 22 offences, he owes a reparation of $42,500, and hardly any of that is to insurance companies. That's all to people. He targeted houses in the poorer earthquake-damaged part of Christchurch that he lives in, and many of the people he stole from didn't have insurance. He stole cars that weren't insured. So innocent, poor members of our Christchurch community have lost a whole lot of money, and they haven't got a dog show of him ever paying back a cent, or certainly not for the next few years. So this severely cannabis-dependent young man is causing huge harm to our community. He was using cannabis daily by the time he was 13 and a half, and not surprisingly, that was when he last attended school. His mother's alcoholic, he's on the fetal alcohol spectrum. He was accepted into drug court on the 15th of August. He was arrested very end of June and was in custody. After his FGC and everything, finally by the 15th of August, he appeared in court again with a drug court plan. He was accepted into drug court, but there wasn't a bed available for him in residence until the 26th of August. That actually wasn't all bad. It meant by the time he got into residence, he'd been 5 weeks locked up, so he'd gone through the worst of his withdrawals. It's been a real struggle for him. He hasn't been at school since he was 13 years and 5 months old. He didn't know how to get out of bed in the morning and do, brush his teeth, have a meal and do things. It was a hugely difficult learning experience for him, but he is doing really, really well. He's now head of kitchen at Odyssey Residence. First time in his life he's ever been head of anything. He's doing incredibly well and he loves cooking, which is interesting because he never ever had any role models about people preparing food, but he's good at it. He's charming. He's a delightful young man, and if you sat in when I'm talking to him, you would never pick that he had caused the harm and mayhem that he's caused. He talks now about feeling good, about his brain being cleared, about his brain working, and he talks about the fact that he used to think he was really dumb, but he knows now that he's not nearly as dumb as he thought he was. He had real problems, like many of these kids, about getting to sleep. And there's a whole lot of issues for these kids who use so much cannabis. They smoke before they go to sleep. They don't wake up. They miss curfews. They miss all sorts of things. And you find that it all comes back to their cannabis abuses or dependencies. For this young man, for years now, he's smoked himself to sleep at night. So it's been really difficult for him. When he was locked up into Punawai, he was medicated in the end because he simply couldn't sleep because he had only ever gone to sleep really stoned. Now he's going to sleep, not well, but he's on no medication and no drugs at all, which is great. The next young man is quite different, although the same age. This young man, a really interesting dilemma if you think about this young man. He's 16, he's got robbery charges, attempted robbery charges. His offending is incredibly serious. He was on the verge of being transferred to the district court. He could easily have gone to jail at 16. He first started smoking weed when he was 9 and he was regularly using when he was 12. He has talked to me and to his drug court social worker and to his clinicians about the amount of stealing he used to do to get money for drugs. Kids drinking alcohol can steal alcohol quite easily from friends and family and supermarkets, and it's really interesting the way they do it, but I won't share that with you. I'd hate to lead any of you astray. But you can't do that with weed. You need money. And so these kids, they steal caps and clothes, they steal expensive perfume. It's easy if you get dressed up a little bit and go into department stores or chemists. They steal things that they can sell on the street. To slightly digress, a young woman in drug court a year or so ago, such an entrepreneur. She used to dress up. She looked really flash. She would get dressed up and she would go to all the flash shops in Christchurch, all the top chemist shops. She would steal so much expensive perfume, go to Manchester Street, for those of you who don't know, Christchurch is where the prostitutes hang out, and she would sell really expensive perfume to the prostitutes on Manchester Street for $10 or $15 a bottle. Cannabis debt cleared no time. She did that regularly. Imagine if she used that entrepreneurial streak in a slightly more positive way. But this young man, Al, serious crime. He committed several robberies of dairies only to get money or cigarettes to sell because he needed money to buy cannabis. Absolutely traumatised some of his dairy owners. The victim impact statement's just harrowing. So what do we think about, what would you think about a high court judge or a district court judge who never did youth court work, faced with a surly, big, strong-looking 16-year-old Māori boy who had terrorised some dairy owners, done some really, really serious aggravated robberies? What do we think about him at 16 getting sent to maybe 3 or 4 years jail when we know that his living environment was such that he was smoking weed when he was 9, that he was using regularly at 12, that he hardly had any high school schooling at all, and that he's just incredibly damaged, and that he's also been in the care of Child, Youth and Family since he was about 7, and his father's a heavy cannabis user, and he spent time with him. So this young man, on the verge of being transferred to the district court and from there probably to jail, was in youth justice residence since, I think, end of April, mid-April. He wasn't interested in anything. I'd met him before because he was regularly appearing in court. He dried out, came clean when he was locked up, and gradually he came to the realisation that drug court might be an option for him. It was a bit of a punt, really, because his offending was so serious. He's under a really tight rein. But again, he came into Odyssey residence, having completely detoxed in youth justice residence. He's doing remarkably well. He's doing way better. I mean, that's another thing that keeps happening to me all the time. I keep thinking I can pick them. I think, well, we'll take this kid into drug court, but I really don't think he's going to work. I don't verbalise this much anymore because I'm forever being proved wrong. But this young man, I wasn't sure about. He's done remarkably well, but the challenge for us is a transition plan because he's still only 16 and the difficulty is going to be where he's going to go next. The next young boy is 16. He's on relatively serious burglaries. For him, at his FGC, a relative turned up who was drug-free and offered him a home because this young man didn't have a home where cannabis wasn't smoked on a daily basis. So he is living with a really supportive relative in the community. He's attending the Odyssey Day program. His schoolwork, he's on a trajectory like this. He's a bright young man, but his schoolwork was marred by his cannabis dependence. He's doing really well. All of these young people that I've talked about, and all of the young people that are in drug court, their criminal offending is just a small part of it. Their cannabis dependence is the big part of it, and it has caused multiple problems, including offending, but none of them are at school, and it's completely unscientific. It's just my observation of the kids I work with in drug court. The kids that are abusing alcohol, especially the heavy binge drinkers that binge in the weekend, they seem to manage to get to school a bit more often. Kids heavily dependent on cannabis just don't make it at all. Their dependency, so it affects their education, it affects their family relationships, it affects everything. A large majority of the kids that come to drug court with a cannabis dependence are second or third generations of cannabis-dependent young people. They grow up in an environment where that's what happens at home. These kids need treatment, and they need really intensive treatment, and some of them are in drug court for well over a year. My older two kids went to university in America, and they used to joke to me about the fact that I saw way more of these drug court kids than I did of them. I talked more to them, I knew more about them than what my own kids were doing, and I guess that's right. It's sad. Some of the kids don't want to leave drug court. They're ready to graduate, they're clean, sober, on a course, doing well, and they don't want to go. And I think that's because they've got this group of adults, some authoritative adults, a police officer in a uniform, a judge in a black gown, and they know that we care about them and like them, and we praise them. And these kids, some of them don't take praise easily to start with, but they get positive reinforcement. They also have really strict boundaries. So it's really interesting that we get, not uncommonly, the drug court social worker or the young person social worker will say, well, we're talking about their discharge from drug court, and they wonder if they couldn't just keep coming for a bit longer. So it's interesting. But one of the most startling things for me is that any hour of the day, any day of the week, I can say to a young person, your behaviour is so bad, you have to be locked up, and they are taken away and they are locked up instantly. But I can never, almost never say to a young person, your addiction is so bad, you need to be in residence and you'll go there now. I can't say that. There's something incredibly wrong with our system when I can lock up a young person any day of the week, but I can't send a young person to residential rehab when that's what they need and when that's why they're offending. I look forward to the day when I can do that. Thank you.